Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And I think it's time we go talk about the gaming industry, but also with a cheeky bit of politics thrown in there for good measure as well. For those who didn't know, I used to myself be a fairly political commentator. I intertwined it with fairly media-friendly topics and even covered trending topics from time to time, but I was pretty political. I'm not going to go into that much depth, mainly because I will likely save it for a special video, and I expect to be asked it for the Q&A. There's some statements I stand by, some statements not so much. Ideas evolve. If you care about it, you can DM me. If I was still political, I think today's topic would be of my interest. However, we are running with it on my new format, because I think it is embedded in YouTube culture enough to appeal to many people here. So it's a bit of old, a bit of new, and anyway, there's an equally prominent reason that I'm doing this, because probably to the surprise of some of you, I used to watch a lot of Angry Joe. I wasn't crazy about the streams and so on and many of the other smaller videos he did, however, I'd always tune into some of his more long-form reviews, and even some film reviews. You know, the one with other Joe and that bloke with the beard, yeah, that one. And also, as a person with OCD levels of pedanticism, I love lists, and in around 2014, at the turn of the year, Angry Joe would drop 3 or 4 big fat top 10 lists for me to dig my teeth into. Delish. I really enjoy a lot of review channels. They definitely encourage critical thinking, and as someone who has always dreamed about being involved in the creative industry, it gave me ideas that I might or might not want to do if I ever followed those arrows. I haven't yet, though there's still time, and I've ended up here. What a place to be. Anyhow, central to that was Angry Joe. He didn't always provide his criticism in the most constructive way, but he never held back. I mean, it's in his name, what would I expect? I enjoyed his passion balanced with delivery of valid criticism, and he also made his name as a huge proponent of consumer values, which in spite of my criticism of certain people of recent, I'm still a huge fan of people getting value for their money. So he definitely played a fundamental part in my life and my YouTube career. Another thing that I followed was his politics. It always appeared to me that he fell into a moderate but passionate left, while still being empathetic towards other views. This is particularly demonstrated when he covers video game controversies like in his top 10 lists. It was a few weeks back I was browsing the internet for the latest spice and decided to see if there were any new Angry Joe videos. I don't watch them on a particularly regular basis at this point, mainly because of my own commitments. University and YouTube equally take up their fair share of time, and I'm still expected to be social to keep up appearances. However, I noticed that one of his most recent videos had a particularly poor like to dislike ratio, that being this cheeky bugger. At the time I moved on, I was just looking for videos to watch. However, a few hours later I heard that it was something a bit more contentious, and then someone messaged me, and then some videos came out. And I was like, alright lads, what is the spice then? Well, to understand the spice, we have to go back to the roots. So let's take a little trip. This is Battlefield, I assume most of you know it. I sure know Battlefield. I personally play Call of Duty more than this franchise, but that was only because at the time most of my mates play Call of Duty too. Ooh, Right Opinion played it because his friends did. Yes, shut up, mate. I was 13 and had to manually decipher how socializing worked. I went through a period of copying and pasting highest rated insults off a website onto my Facebook page. Those were dark days, we don't talk about them. Get it? Got it? Good. I realized I went off on a bit of a tangent there. So Battlefield, it's a game that people played, and gaming a few years ago was in a sticky situation. You see there's this thing called Call of Duty 2, where both games were released fairly regularly. Annually for the Call of Duty franchise. Now, whereas many games typically wait years to have sequels, if they have sequels at all, this idea of a game a year was properly ingrained into the culture. However, like with every progression, you need new ideas, and so there was a chronological movement, typically forwards, and with these series we gradually, or even quickly depending on your perception, moved into the future. And honestly, in many people's opinions, it was a bit shit. Not because there was anything bad about the idea, but firstly, it had been done before, multiple times, and secondly, for many people, the overwhelming amount of gadgets and flashy visuals seemed to replace player skill. It just became all a little silly. So Battlefield, noticing this, smartly decided to go back in time to World War I for Battlefield 1, which was given great praise by many critics because in spite of the slightly short single-player campaign, it was supplemented by an excellent multiplayer which had some pretty cool features. It was clear that there was a lot to enjoy about this game. So following the success of Battlefield 1, they thought that they would keep up that spirit and this time to shift to the World War II scenario. However, as would be expected with any new game, changes were likely to be made. Some new game modes, some alterations to how the game's played, and the one that vexed certain individuals, particularly those vocal in the YouTube sphere, the introduction of a female lead character. Now, Joe decided that he would give his take on it, criticizing those who thought this way and going on to hypothesize a different explanation. And after sitting down and watching it myself, the best way to describe his video would be confusing. However, with a bit of research and understanding, I'm sure we can find a way to get the best side of both parties in this circumstance. So today we're going to be re-entering the battlefield of politics, representation, video games, and so much more. And you know what? I think I'm more ready than I've ever been, despite the fact that I'm currently recording with a duvet over my head. This is what quality pays for, my friends. So without further ado, let's get into this. As assumed, Angry Joe's persona is angry. What a fucking revelation. That means that he typically tends to alienate a lot of people who he criticizes, and believe me when I say he does it a lot. Now generally, if you want people to come around to see your point of view, being angry is not the best way to conduct yourself. However, Joe's technique was never to have those he criticized to see his point of view. What do I mean? Well, to understand that, we need to talk about corporations. The hard truth is, which many of us have accepted by now, is that corporations do not really care about how happy an individual consumer is with the product. If you make a complaint, it will be filed away somewhere nicely, and it's essentially a number to them. But that number that is assigned does matter, because if the complaint is serious enough and it threatens to remove monetary funds, then having those sorts of complaints in volume would be extremely concerning, because in the words of the famous philosopher Mr. Krabs,
the money is always right.
So a really good example of this is the loot box situation with Battlefield 2. The sheer volume and animosity of the outrage caused such unprecedented levels of backlash that EA, under the pressure of Disney, had to backtrack their implemented changes. A lot of these corporate businesses will try their luck with the consumer and push these little amendments each time, grappling more money from the unsuspecting audience until they overstep the boundary and we tell them to fuck off. And right central to that anger at the corporations was the man himself, Mr. Joseph Vargas here. And this is why Angry Joe's rage is often effective in these situations. He knows exactly how to direct it. When you're facing off against a mega, big, bad business, you need someone who can mobilize the indignation within the viewer. They need someone to rile up the people. Companies like EA, to me at least, have proven themselves as not really concerned with what the consumer wants. You can't present a reasoned argument to change their mind, like you could change my mind. They need a different treatment, a firmer hand. Let's consider it tough love. EA, you're receiving my tough love, even though I positively loathe you. But anyhow, Angry Joe delivers that. And that's why people felt good about his content, because it channeled people's feelings in a way that made them feel more inclined to be vocal about it. It gave them a purpose. We need people like that who can exert influence. And yes, in many ways it is good on that behalf. He also has a habit of strawmanning, which once again, in a way, is fine. There's this character, Corporate Commander, who is pretty much the satirical strawman on the corporate mentality, which once again, when dealing with a level of truth, it's perfectly fine, as I've said before. As long as the exaggeration is part of the humor and not placed prior, then we don't have a problem. And it's clear where it lies in this instance. When dealing with companies, Angry Joe doesn't pull punches, which is important in a way. However, when speaking to his fan base or even people who aren't necessarily his fans, if you want to change mentality or behavior, it can be just a simple case of speaking to them with a tone of reason. When dealing with audiences, there'll always be a set of people who are open to persuasion, and a set of people who won't be so open to persuasion. Now that can fluctuate depending on what audience you're speaking to, but for me, it always pays off to be somewhat open to discourse in these scenarios, because even if you only convince a few people, that's a few people more than none. With companies, you don't have to do this, mainly because they're a bunch of highly educated individuals who can probably completely understand the reasoning behind every one of your points, but choose to ignore it. Because it's a free market, they can do what they want for that sweet, sweet dollar. With audiences, most of them don't tend to have that agenda. And as I said, this can change within individual circumstance, but I think that's an important point for everyone to keep in mind with today's topic. I will likely have disagreements with people today. Doesn't mean you can't deliver them in a way that may make them more empathetic to your point of view. You can throw civility out the window if an individual is just being a dick, or is snidely attempting to undermine you. Those people can fuck off. But I hope I've made my point clear. My point is that directed anger works sometimes, and not so well other times. And when dealing with large collectives who may have a variance in ideology, there are some instances when you could say, yes, the ideology is so illogical that it is beyond justification, but generally, I don't think this is one of them. So we've essentially dealt what I believe are two key elements of justified anger: how rational it is, and who the recipients are. There are lots of little technicalities within that, but that's why we look at these situations on a case-by-case basis. Like today. With the case of businesses being dickheads, Angry Joe was the firebrand gamer who was going to stand up to these bad men. It always felt like a David versus Goliath, so even in cases where the anger may have been overstated, the sheer fact that companies were so huge just meant that people never felt remotely remorseful for doing it. There are plenty of psychological studies that have examined how emotional interaction works. One always sticks out to me, that when dealing with loss in mutual relationships, anger is much less effective at responding to that than other emotions. I think that's important. Now, today's situation is disjunct from that study, though I do think there are familiar sentiments. When you direct anger towards a person for some alleged wrongdoing or disagreement, it makes them much more likely to be provoked than necessarily be empathetic towards how you view the situation, which makes them even less likely to being convinced or persuaded, and more likely to just turn around and say fuck you. Does that make them right? No, not at all. But if there's a better way to make people listen, why wouldn't you choose it? Angry Joe has built his career off being angry and galvanizing people about affairs that they might not have cared about otherwise. Therefore, it's almost likely that a lot of his fans will be very passionate about topics and may even demonstrate anger themselves. I'm not saying that Angry Joe made his fans angry. In fact, they may have been passionate people long before they watched Joe's content. But when they did, his underlying passion probably resonated in a way. Your fan base does tend to reflect you somewhat as a persona. Not universally, but at least partially. Which leads us to this video. With the concepts of anger explained, I think we can now apply it to this lovely piece and explain why people may have taken a decent objection. Let's quickly discuss the argument before we break down Joe's video. So basically what I understand from my research, the comments, and the subsequent narratives is that the inclusion of a female with a prosthetic limb in a game that is depicting a real event should do it in a historically accurate manner, out of a level of respect for those who may have sacrificed their lives during the war. I will of course discuss my viewpoint later on this, but that is the basis. Now in the intro, I branded Angry Joe's video as confusing. Why is that? Well, you see, the whole anti-SJW and women topic was actually kind of secondary to what Angry Joe was discussing. From what I'd heard, I was expecting this rant to be aimed at all the people who were complaining about there being a female character in the new Battlefield game, but he more used it as a springboard to explain why in fact the female character wasn't the main reason that people weren't buying the game. We'll discuss the credibility of those claims in a moment, but is the fact that it was a secondary topic good or bad? Well, typically I'd lean towards saying it's a good thing. However, in this instance, I am going to make a clear exception. If it had been a passing comment, it probably wouldn't have given the critics enough ammunition, but he paid just enough amount of time to it to make it worthy of response, while at the same time using it as a secondary topic, meaning that he never actually responded to it. He just presented it in this exaggerated manner. In fact, if you pay attention, he barely provides any commentary on it at all, other than the impersonations, which is in the sort of typical Angry Joe manner, the sort of exaggerated character who takes the piss out of a mentality, with a little undertone of fury at those people. We'll break down any specific details in a moment, but you can see why this probably didn't come across too well. You see, Joe directed his straw man imitations and attitude partly towards the viewer. Not entirely, he does mention these YouTubers, but he definitely makes some general statements. Now, some of the YouTubers that he watched may have had an agenda to push, but a lot of audiences are just looking for something to believe in, convictions to have. Living a life without opinion and discourse is very empty. Opinions bring people together, whether in friendship or discourse, and these people look at the arguments whether from a partisan set of sources or not, and they deliberate what they think is the best opinion to have. I think firstly, Joe underestimated the amount of people who felt this way and the sort of passion that they had about this topic. Without being too cynical of his intentions, I doubt he would have spoken so disparagingly of that position if he'd realized the depth that these ideas ran within many of his viewership. I mean, you can tell by the way he words it almost.
There are people out there that's like, I'm not going to give you $60 of my money until you take those women out. Until you do it more historically accurate in your fictional stories. In the trailers, there's been women, and one of the war stories is going to feature a fictional story of a female resistance fighter. I will not pay you $60 till all that's out. In Battlefield 6, I better see no women. Then I'll give you my money. Do I think there are people like that? Yes, unfortunately, I do.
Even if you're a strong, passionate person with strong, passionate opinions, no one goes out to hemorrhage subscribers like that. But Angry Joe wasn't really that angry in his video. I mean, sure, he's a naturally provocative person, but as rants go, it was fairly low-key. I mean, his attitude didn't help, but as a secondary topic, did it require that level of vitriol? Unfortunately, that's what Joe's architectured himself. As I said earlier, when you're a naturally enthusiastic person, you're going to attract naturally enthusiastic fans. And what happened is that this debate had been going on for a fair bit of time. If he'd intervened early, he may have been able to change some minds, let alone wrap himself up in all this controversy, but he didn't. He waited for people to really solidify their opinions, tell themselves they were right, and then launch this video. What about the video's points? Well, Joe expresses that there are different reasons for why Battlefield sales are failing, contrary to the people claiming it was the female main character. And I do understand where he's coming from. I do think there are probably an array of reasons for the failure in sales of new Battlefield. Obviously, the timing and release between one of the most anticipated games in ages might well be a significant factor, and the idea that it has been marketed terribly is another legitimate point. I'd really only seen one trailer, and it wasn't particularly awe-inspiring as trailers go. However, there was a perspective that could have included this that definitely seems viable to me, even as someone who seems skeptical of the whole explanation that many others came up with. And this is a point that in my opinion should have been considered, particularly regarding the marketing. When Battlefield 1 had their trailers released in anticipation for the game, they had the fact that they were completely changing the style on their side. Here was this trailer which was, in a way, a complete game changer with all the context. They had a completely different landscape to reflect these ideas on, and it was bringing back people to what they wanted. At the same time, the presentation of the trailer allowed them to introduce all these new elements individually, exciting the audience while building up to this big fuck-off airship. So really, when it comes to trailers, the background and the foreground elements are definitely separate in how they can appeal to the viewer. Now, World War II is definitely different from World War I. In many ways, but stylistically, with regards to the background, they do bear a set of similarities, so it no longer had the wow factor from simple premise. Now, this in a way wouldn't have affected audience reaction hugely. In fact, I'm sure most people wouldn't have minded, but it definitely could have affected sales. On top of this, the trailer, despite being a whole minute longer than the Battlefield 1 trailer, just threw a load of things on the screen at once and expected us to take it in. What was actually in the foreground? Well, as we've discussed, without having to concede too much, it is kind of this lovely lady here. She opens and closes the trailer fairly iconically, and even though there are many components on screen, it's clear that there is a level of focus on her. In my opinion, I don't really care about that. And to get this out of the way, just so people understand my position, a lot of history is not particularly intimate to me. Does it interest me? Of course, I take great interest in it, but when I go to play games, I play it for the fun rather than the historical accuracy, and therefore it doesn't really bother me that they alter details. I mean, it's a video game. If you wanted a realistic game about World War II, it would be slow and depressing. With that said, exaggerating details is definitely different to changing details, and I do understand that for some people, for an experience to be immersive, they take preference to certain elements being accurate over others. And honestly, the glamorization of past past events is inescapable to an extent. The next point is discussed under the premise that the inclusion of a female character was used as a marketing tool. Now, although not explicitly stated, I feel that from how it was presented, they were trying to bring attention to it. If you feel differently and that this was just a trailer with a character who happened to be female, then I completely understand that. And this next point will not connect with you. However, as a marketing tool by Battlefield, it is fairly futile. This is not the case of having something groundbreaking. This is not a female Doctor Who. This is a character in a video game. It appears to me that Battlefield either seriously overvalue the cultural impact of their game or severely misread the demographics. The point is about sales. And let's say people don't care about the female lead. You know what? I agree with that. I don't give a shit. I think most people don't give a shit. Okay, so they have a female lead. Great. A lot of video games have female leads. When you play with people like Shell, Athena, or many others, Battlefield doesn't have any rights to declare themselves as a bastion for any causes. They had loads of time to do it before, and they're kind of late to the party. Everyone else has gone home. So instead of being lifted up by feminists, they were shot down by historicists. It's hard to feel bad for them when the move seems so bloody calculated. I think that's what stands out to me. It seems phony. And when you have the biggest shill of the company, or the biggest ex-shill of the company, Patrick Soderland, trying to use his daughter as emotional leverage in an interview, yes. I wonder how many of his millions that he's fleeced from the consumer he's decided to donate towards the causes that he suddenly cares about so much. I feel that regardless of whether the sales have been affected by the timing, as a gaming company, you have to introduce something that excites people. And that's what was lacking above all. Plenty of games have introduced controversial elements that have upset people, but they still did relatively well with the sales because they were original and well thought out and well marketed. That's what I see with Battlefield, just a failure to capitalize on ideas. So I disagree with people who say that it's the female character that has solely caused the decrease in sales, because at the end of the day, even though many of our YouTube videos may pull some nice views and we have a great set of fans to support us, we don't reach a majority of consumers, many of whom are not concerned with politics. I only heard about Gamergate when Angry Joe included it when I was a gamer. We sometimes forget that we're not a central hub. Battlefield 1 sold 25 million copies at least. How many of those people are going to be watching us ranting? However, the focus on a female character could definitely be symbolic of that absence of creativity. No one left, right, or center likes a fair weather feminist. It's opportunistic, like businesses are. But moreover than that, it's just bad marketing. So that would be my response to Angry Joe, and also the people that he was responding to. I don't believe in the narrative that it's just female characters impacting the sales, and I say that many people do not care, but their focus on it could definitely have taken away from other features that really should be more defining within the game. They're not as revolutionary as they think. What I'm trying to say here is that there is clearly an overlap between viewpoints, and there could have been this bridge built between understanding, and it may have even convinced some people away from the narrative being created by a lot of these other commentators that Angry Joe clearly feels are in the wrong. But he instead decided to completely castigate them, at the same time castigating the audiences. And this is what really annoys me about the community in general. So let's discuss it a bit more. I responded to the narrative that Joe responded to. I did not have to even address whether I thought they should have females in the game or not. In fact, the only reason I did was just so people could see my opinion. And maybe it would change a few minds, I don't know. People may have their mind made up already. Angry Joe almost seemed to go out of his way to make a jab at the critics of the inclusion of a female character in the game, even though he didn't need to. Which is weird because he then makes a second video which is a response to another video in which he says that people are annoyed because he presented a different idea.
Brought up fucking social justice warriors versus anti-social justice warriors, and because I provided a different fucking idea that maybe the pre-orders are a little weak, not because of the fact that there are women in it and it's historically inaccurate, but maybe it's because it's in this particular time and it's in this particular this, and I tried some other things because I've played it and I enjoyed it and I thought it was good, but oh fuck, I was wrong.
And that's the thing. I don't think the ideas that Angry Joe was trying to speak about were particularly bad. It was just the tone that fired back on you. Because in those instances, it doesn't matter how valid your point is. If you have no respect to the people you present it to, then they're not going to hear you out. For the record, I do not think Joe is a shill. Joe doesn't seem to be defending any company conduct here. It's just impossible to work out who he planned to respond to when he behaved with such hostility towards them. Let me present to you a hypothetical scenario, and one that should serve as a base assumption in many instances, at least in my opinion at least. You have a commentator, and he doesn't like you. He's saying to all his fans, this is the truth, listen to me, do not listen to them, they're wrong. These fans may be convinced. As I said, it's on a spectrum. How do you respond? And when I say how do you speak to the fans? In this instance, Angry Joe doesn't seem to understand that people, whether they're right or wrong in the way they feel, aren't gonna listen to him. It'd be like me. Instead of starting off my video like I did today, I would instead be going like this. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Best Opinion, where I show why you're wrong. And today we've got Angry Joe, this ugly bellend who looks like he's the frontrunner for 2018's Virgin of the Year. And today we have him trying to talk about video games like he even cares about them. How adorable. We don't really want him in the community, we just tolerate him. And when he's not rambling on about boring theories that no one gives a shit about, he's attacking gamers. The ones he's supposed to be standing up for. Talking about how they're all sexist man pigs. Yeah, screw you, buddy. Now, he obviously has received this treatment from many people, and I disagree with it firmly, and it just shows how individuals value riling people up over actually trying to change their mind. But this does not make Joe's point of view excusable, it just means that he's sunk to their level. I feel Joe probably witnessed the backlash to the inclusion of a female character in this scenario and thought to himself, this is all rather unjustified. People were becoming riled up. He even says that himself. He probably had his reasons for thinking that way. I also feel that it isn't necessarily worth the vitriol. And honestly, I think there are decent responses that can be made to the claims. But I feel like these sorts of topics that people are trying to have discussions with have gone to such shit of recent, and it was a trap that Joe just fell in. Which is why I titled this part Preaching to the Choir, because the sort of tone that's presented is exactly what people who agree with whatever YouTuber want to hear. They want to hear something to be pissed off, and then the person is pissed off and they respond in a pissed off manner. And audiences on the two sides are never really interested in the context. They just want to hear the person they hate get dunked on by the person they like. By buying into that demeanor himself, Joe probably does make some friends in certain places, but is unlikely to change minds, which is really what I think discourse should be about. Now, once again, this is no pass to some of the people who made responses to him. They were clearly lacking interest in convincing him and more in stoking the fire. But they'll have their time very soon. From my somewhat extensive experience, Joe likes to present himself as an arbiter of the community and consumerism, and in a way he always has. And by making these videos about top 10 controversies and providing his opinions on it, it tells me that he's someone who really does want to cover these sensitive topics with nuance and gain respect from those in the community. I think the problem is he became a poster child for what many of his critics wanted to make him out to be. In the battle of ideologies, things are so much more about presentation than they are about points, and I think he'll regret how he spoke, because he's got himself caught up in the trap. When really his video had some points that could have shifted perspective, everything got drawn to his aside comments, which weren't really necessary in the first place. Maybe that's his persona, maybe that's what he wants. But I don't think it is. I think a series of choices in how he has conducted himself led to this. He has attracted fans from all over the field with his firebrand rhetoric and clear-cut consumer values. But if he directs that attitude at those people, they're likely to respond in the same sort of tone, and also compose the narrative that he doesn't stand for those very values that brought them there in the first place. I don't believe he's not pro-consumer just for disagreeing with people's points of view on this topic. It's not really corporatist-centric. I just hope that today this has been a more relaxed view on the whole thing after it's all quietened down a bit. I think Joe is legitimately one of the good guys, but unfortunately everything past has led to this present, and he has provoked part of it unto himself in this instance, and maybe in spite of the anger, take some of my points on board. Anyhow, that was the video. Yes, great fun, and we had a great time doing this one. As I said, duvet over my head. This is America. What joy. However, if my predictions are right, we probably have passed 50,000 by now, so I really want to thank everyone for that. Obviously, I'll probably put out a tweet and YouTube comment too, but let's make it official YouTube. Thanks guys for all the support, it means a lot. 50k would not be possible without these blokes, the editors. They have done once again a stellar job of creating another masterpiece, and I cannot thank them enough. Go and send them some love because they really, really deserve it. If you want to reach me and I'm not responding to comments, my Twitter's @TheRightOpinion, Facebook as well, sometimes use that. Links in the pinned comment. You're gonna love them. I also have a Discord, which I have been a bit more active in recently. I told you guys I'd pick it up. Mainly text chat though, but you can still reach me on my account there too. I try and keep everything open for those purposes. Anyhow, I don't think I really have too much else to say. Hopefully this audio sounds better than my last one, or else I've just overheated myself for like 50 minutes. Well, I'm gonna put my headphones on soon and find out. Until then, however, I'm The Right Opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.